You brought up the idea of pain, and let's, fast forward. A private equity firm's got a portfolio. They've probably got one or two companies that has some level of pain. What, either a pain indicator, a question, if they're on the board, a question they should ask the management team or the board that would identify an indicator to escalate, to have these conversations and explore, like, there's real opportunity here, there's latent value we can go into?
There are two ways to parse that question. One is preemptive, and the other is reactive. Which one do you want to take first?
Let's go preemptive.
Okay.
Get ahead of the curve.
Let's say that the company is performing, quote unquote. A good board member, and that's the context of the question, would ask what if questions. It's almost like a scenario analysis. And what if we bought somebody? What if sales increased 50% in 2 years because we did different geography? So what if has a chain reaction? That was an input. If I got revenue, what happens in the process, which is largely described fulfillment? Well, I don't have the capacity.
Right.
Okay.
So
what do we do?
Part of your question is, do they have an answer?
Yeah.
So regardless of the answer, do they have one?
So thoughtful questions, what ifs, and depending on the answer you get, the person with pedigree on the board, and in the industry in the 20 years I've been in it, has done a much better job of who is on the board,
Mm-hmm.
and they bring people in with certain expertise relative to what the business model aspires to do. And it is that category of professional that can ask the right question. I have a lot of faith in that. It isn't that the deal team can't, it's that the pedigree person comes with a different angle on perspective because they've probably been there and done that a few times. And the best teacher is your own mistakes.
Mm-hmm.
So when they ask and they don't get an answer that makes sense, then they play five whys. Well, help me understand why, until you get down to something that's plausible, and they can discern whether they think that's a reasonable answer or not. And if they don't, it's not a hammer down kind of
Right.
reaction. Is, that one's important enough. Maybe we ought to explore this a little deeper, and they take it offline.
So like, if there's a turnaround or a pain that creates a situation where people will dig in, right, to look for
Mm-hmm.
a better path, a better opportunity, and see where the evidence leads. That leaves the one, though, this is one of the things I love about M&A in general. When
Mm-hmm.
there's an exit or a buy, a purchase, that creates sort of even if it's artificial, reason to look at how are we doing and how much better could we be. And that's part of what I just heard you talking about when you think about it from a preemptive standpoint, is how does a board balance, like, staying out of the way, letting the management team do what they're doing because they're growing, they're making good money, but have they asked the question, where could we be or where should we be, when there isn't, the customers aren't complaining, the bank's not complaining, we're not tripping covenants, we're hitting a decent return, but what could it be? Is that, so when have you been pulled into situations like that where you helped a good company really elevate its game?
I'd say that's the majority of it.
Nice.
Because these, now, with all due respect to situations firms, that's not my target market.
Right.
And my target market is, let's say for the most part, the 80-20 is south of 20 million in EBITDA to start, probably more
Mm-hmm.
like south of 15.
Okay.
So they bought something for potential. Okay.
Right.
And it has performed admirably, and or they see potential based on their diligence that it's there to be groomed. So it really is, how much better could it be? And I have a lot of respect for sponsors who deliberately leave something else for the next guy, because it has a pretty holistic impact on the ecosystem. One, they earn a good reputation by not slipping somebody a Mickey.
Right.
Second, they brand themselves as coaches for aspiring entrepreneurs to create that bigger company with minimal collateral damage along the way. And that's something to think about. That's something to think about. So there typically is a lot to fix. I learned this business this way, that if you go about most things the right way, you don't deal with as many turnaround situations.
Right.
Been there, done that, learned a tremendous amount, but it's like a black hole in space. You only do one at a time. So it means it basically takes your resources offline.
Sure.
I prefer to avoid that.
Sure.
I'd like to juggle a half a dozen at a time as opposed to one that eats me up and it takes a while to recover.